The scripture reading for today comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25. It is the judgment of the nations. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne in his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to the least of these members of my family, you did it to me." Then he will say to those at his left hand, "You that are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me, naked, and you did not give me clothing, sick and in prison, and you did not visit me." Then they also will answer, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not take care of you?" Then he will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life." The word of God for the people of God. Let all say thanks be to God. Amen. You may be seated. So this morning is the first Sunday in July, and I've been looking for an opportunity to do this sermon series on the 5 practices of fruitful congregations. And I figured there's 5 Sundays in July. What a great time to do this 5-week sermon series. By the way, Mission Committee, there's 5 Sundays in July. Just wanted to let you know. But we're going to be doing this, looking at the 5 practices of fruitful congregations. I've heard it called the 5 faithful practices as well. It is a book by Bishop Robert Snazy. Bishop Robert Snazy, just for a little bit of background, is the United Methodist Bishop of the Missouri Annual Conference, which is in your jurisdiction, as was mentioned before. And Bishop Snazy is expected to be moved this July, or to be moved this September. The announcements come in July, as is our own bishop. And so there's a 5% chance or so that Bishop Snazy will be your bishop come September. So just pay attention, I think. It's more likely he'll go to Texas, but still, pay attention to it. The 5 faithful practices that he mentions are radical hospitality, passionate worship, intentional faith development, risk-taking mission and service, and extravagant generosity. Adjectives play a big part in this book. The first 4 come from Bishop Bruce O., another United Methodist bishop, and actually currently the president of the Council of Bishops. And then Bishop Snazy added in that 5th, extravagant generosity. We're going to look at one each week, which means this week we're looking at hospitality. You may have figured that out from the scriptures that all deal with how does a Christian show hospitality, and what does Jesus expect us to be doing to those around us. One of the things that Bishop Snazy does, and at least in the 2 chapters I've read so far, is that he looks at what is the baseline, what is the minimum that the church is expected to be doing anyway, what should you already be doing, and then looks at how do we take that to that next step to maybe help the church have a possibility, the most possibility of becoming a vibrant and vital congregation. I say the most possibility because I don't think it's guaranteed to work, but I think it gives us the best chance for it to work. In one of his illustrations in this chapter, he talks about a woman in the Missouri Conference who took over her first pastorate, a small rural congregation of 100 average weekly attendance. And I began to think, okay. So, we'll take it as it is. But I do think it gives us the best opportunity to become vital in our congregations. So the first thing is, what is Christian hospitality? What is the bare minimum, what you are expected to be doing anyway? I want to illustrate these two things by using a story. And so we'll illustrate Christian hospitality. What does Christian hospitality look like? And let's talk about the fictional case of a woman coming in. And let's say a woman's in her early 20s. She's got a toddler that she's very self-conscious about when she walks in because she notices she has a toddler and that toddler's making noise like toddlers do. So she comes in. Maybe she's been invited. Christian hospitality involves inviting people at the very beginning. So maybe you were her neighbor and you saw her struggling. Maybe her husband's been laid off. I don't know. But you said, hey, come and visit this church. I've gotten a lot out of it, and it seems to be very helpful for me. And come and see what's going on here. And so she decides to go ahead and come. So she walks in the door. Probably walks in the door a few minutes late because most visitors, first-time visitors, walk in the door a few minutes late. And so she comes in and she's greeted by our greeter. So Malin sits there. Usually Malin sits there and greets her and hands her a bulletin, gets her name. Gets the name of the toddler, engages the toddler a little bit, and then invites her to go take a seat in a pew. If she's one of the few visitors who show up early and she happens to sit in your pew, Christian hospitality means you don't make her move so you can sit in your pew. You sit in the pew behind her. Excuse me. This is called receiving her. Okay, so we go through the service, and the toddler begins to act out a little bit and during the sermon, because Pastor Brown's rambling on and on and on, and so maybe you're sitting behind her and you lean forward and say, we've got these bags back in the back to help with toddlers, or if you don't want that, there is a nursery just down the hall. You go down the hall, it's the last door to your left before you hit the kitchen, and we do have it wired so that you can go into the nursery and you'll still be able to hear the service in the nursery, and so we just wanted to let you know that that's there. Okay, at the end of the service, one of you finds out where she lives. You contact me. Someone bakes a piece of bread for them because Lord knows you don't want me doing that. And then I take that piece of bread and I take a little bit of information about the church, and I go and I follow up with that visitor and I visit with them afterwards. This is the beginning of hospitality, that bare minimum. It does involve greeting. I think when we think of hospitality, the first thing we think of is greeters. And it does involve that, but it is so much more. It involves inviting them to church. It involves welcoming them to church. That's everyone, not just the greeter. It involves receiving them. It involves caring for them and caring about them, right? It involves signage. It amazes me, this church being a relatively large building on I-70 in the middle of the Hayes District, we get a bunch of district events, like 3 or 4 a year, that happen, and it amazes me how pastors in this district who have been here 6, 7, 8 times still have to ask me where the bathrooms are. We have signage issues that perhaps we should address, right? I talked about that woman coming in here, and I talked about being directed to the nursery. We would have to direct her to the nursery because it's very difficult to find the nursery. It's very difficult to find the pastor's office. I found this out this past week. We had a family come in for a family visit, and they wanted a neutral site, so we invited them to use the church, and they showed up a little bit earlier than I was expecting them, and they were down in the youth room with the 2-year-old because they couldn't find the pastor's office, and they couldn't find the nursery. And so they wound up in the youth room. I was able to find them. I was able to point them to the nursery, but maybe we have something to improve. It involves parking. Okay, we have a very limited amount of parking spaces out there, as you all know. And one of the things that I've tried to do since I've been here is I've tried to make sure that my car doesn't take up one of those parking spaces. And for every week, other than the weeks my mother is here, and she needs to be closer because she doesn't walk as good as she used to, but in every week that my mother isn't here, my car is at least a block down the road, or at least half a block down the road, which is about all the distance you need to go to be one of the last cars out there, but that leaves that space open for either someone who actually needs it physically or someone who is a visitor. If you're coming as a visitor and you're coming a little bit late, because most visitors come just that little bit late, and you're already apprehensive about coming into the church in the first place, the easiest thing to do is to say, oh, there were no parking spaces, I'm just going to keep going, God must not have wanted me to come to church this week. So keeping those parking spots open unless you're absolutely needing them. This is all involved in Christian hospitality. It involves all of this stuff. And the last thing, I think, is it involves prayer. For most of what I'm going to be talking about today, this is dealing with the first-time visitor who's like the true visitor. not family who's come in from other parts of the country, or not people who would have been here anyway so long as they're in Quinter. This is the true visitor. But I think every visitor, even those who are, the grandson who came in from California, all of them, that last thing, bask that person in prayer that next week. Everyone in the congregation should be praying for everyone who's been announced as a visitor. Bishop Snazy, as he transitions into talking about what to go beyond, he mentions that from time to time, churches can get a little too close-knit. I struggle for words because I don't want to be, they're not really like accusatory here, but like churches can be a little bit too stuck in their ways. They've been doing things the same way for so long, and they're no longer outsiders. And so it doesn't seem to be any strange it is. There's a lot of inside jokes, but everyone gets them. And they don't see anymore what it looks like from an outsider perspective. Right? They don't see how difficult it is to actually penetrate into that when you are an outsider that very first time in. And I think I would agree with Bishop Snazy. The only way really to figure that out is to intentionally go to the visitor and ask, so what'd you think? What are some ways we could improve our hospitality? What are some ways that we could work on things, could go forward with that? That intentionally reaching out to the visitor, that's the first bit that Bishop Snazy kind of says is a little bit extra, a little bit out of the ordinary, what he defines the word radical to mean. In his radical hospitality, he says, what do? Well, you begin to lose the idea that this is an obligation. Right? We had all these scriptures, and Bishop Snazy had way more scriptures even than I read. I just picked out 2 of them. But all these scriptures that indicate to us that we have a duty to be hospitable to those around us. He says radical hospitality stops looking at that as a duty and starts looking at it as a calling, like the main reason we exist. He says the church begins to stop focusing on its own membership and the needs of those in the pews and to start focusing on those who aren't in the pews, to start focusing on the needs of non-members. To quote one pastor that I've heard preach this series before that I kind of like and kind of have adopted it, that the church is the only organization in the world that exists for those that are not members of it. Right? If you're a member of the golf club, you get the privilege of golfing on that golf course, right? You get extra privileges for membership. The church is the only organization in the world that joining it loses privileges because we're focused on those who aren't members. And Bishop Snazy is very, very pressing on this, that all of the church does this. From the pastor to the person who shows up once a year. From the evangelism committee that you would expect to be thinking about this, to even the board of trustees that you maybe wouldn't be thinking about this. He gives a couple of examples. The first example he gives is Vacation Bible School. He says if he were to walk in as bishop and ask, why are you doing Vacation Bible School? What is the purpose of Vacation Bible School? And he says if your church answers that to ensure that our kids are not getting in trouble on a Sunday afternoon in summer, he says you don't have a Vacation Bible School, don't even bother getting a curriculum, just go take them to the park or the pool. He says a Christian hospitality church says the purpose of VBS is to educate our children in the stories of Jesus so that they can learn the stories of Jesus as we did. We have arrived now at a VBS. You can now get a curriculum. It's okay. We have arrived at a Vacation Bible School, and this Vacation Bible School does a lot of good. But it is that baseline Christian hospitality Vacation Bible School. He says a radical hospitality Vacation Bible School's mission statement looks more like so that our children and the children of those around us can come and learn about the stories of Jesus Christ so that they can become truly committed Christians that go forth and transform the world. This is radical hospitality VBS. Do you see that difference? And when the VBS mission statement starts to change like that, we start changing the way VBS works. We start changing things like maybe we add a follow-up. If someone not from our church comes in and is in VBS, maybe we follow up with that. And maybe when Sunday school starts, we have a handwritten letter that comes and says, come and join us for Sunday school. Maybe the pastor comes and visits them. Maybe you add a little bit more advertising, not just in the newspaper and flyers around the building, but maybe you go ahead and write that extra check to go put it on KJIL radio, or maybe the other radio stations around here. Maybe you change the dates. Maybe you change the times so that those families that you're trying to reach can actually come, instead of maybe when it was before, maybe they couldn't come. Maybe you change the location. We hold our VBS in this church or in the Church of the Brethren. Maybe we hold the first day of VBS in the park as a pool party, just as a get to know you, to encourage the kids, to get them excited to come those next 3 days to the church, whereas maybe they may have been intimidated if they didn't know some kids who were going to be there. Do you see how this changes VBS? Now, I want to say, because it sounds like I'm preaching to the evangelism chair here, our VBS actually does quite a bit of this. It's my understanding that Anna does provide that follow-up right before Sunday school, and I should probably do that too. It's my understanding that we do. We've changed the times. This year we changed the time to try and reach out a little bit more. So I want to say, I'm not actually saying this. I'm just looking at that as an example because Bishop Stacey brought it up. It brings up the Board of Trustees. Most churches' boards of trustees exist to maintain the building and ensure it still exists so that the church can function. Right? So they pay the electric bill, they pay the insurance bill, they make sure it's there. He says a board of trustees that is focused on radical hospitality stops thinking about maintaining the building and starts thinking, how can I improve the building? So we start thinking about what temperature should it be. We start thinking about what color the paint should be. We might start making sure that we've touched up all those paint jobs. We start making sure that those little things, like the little wrench in the toilet that keeps dripping, gets fixed so that we can ensure that is there. The Board of Trustees, in radical hospitality, I think most importantly keeps communication going forward. Because the Board of Trustees isn't here every day. They can't see everything, but maybe they can talk to the people who can see a little bit more. Maybe they're in communication with the pastor. Maybe they're in communication with the janitor. Maybe they're in communication with the visitors and intentionally reaching out and asking things. Again, I think our Board of Trustees has been pretty good with that. We have done quite a bit in this church throughout our history of trying to improve the building. Most notably, we added that lift out there so that people who were in wheelchairs could come in. This is the kind of thing I think that we can do more of and that we can do more often to try and become a vital, fruitful congregation. So what does this radical idea look like? Let's go back to our illustration. Let's go back to that woman who's coming in with her toddler. In a radical hospitality, she's been invited. That hasn't changed. One of you has invited her, and so this woman comes in, and she's greeted at the back door by one of our greeters. We have more than one greeter back there, just in case we have more than one visitor at one given time. And so we have one of our greeters, let's say it's still Malin, greets the woman, gets to know her name, greets the toddler a little bit, takes her to a pew. Doesn't just send her off to a pew, takes her to a pew, and not just a random pew. Takes her to a pew that you know that the person behind them, that always sits in that pew right behind them, is someone who is going to be practicing this kind of radical hospitality, someone who's going to be a good person to be sitting in front of. For this particular situation, he might actually just sit them in front of him because they have the toddler that might need the nursery, and that door is right there next to them. He would then go get them a bag from the back because they have a toddler. They're going to need the bag. We know this. And so we get that bag and we get them all set up. And we already have let them know where the nursery is before the service even starts, but she decides not to do that. We move on into the service and we get to the sermon and that toddler starts acting up. Well, that toddler starts acting up and Carolyn leans forward and addresses the toddler, not her, addresses the toddler and says, you know, sometimes I can get that way too, but don't worry, it's Pastor Brown's third year. He's still improving. It will get better as time goes on. And then Carolyn offers the woman to go ahead and take the child herself to the nursery so that the woman doesn't have to lose that little bit of worship in the midst of the time. If the woman's uncomfortable with that, maybe she offers to play with the child just outside the door where the woman can still see him. This is the difference between radical hospitality and Christian hospitality. It is treating that other the way we would want to be treated. It is reaching out to those that are those that are the least of these in the community around us. I have a challenge for you. I have something that has been on my mind for a while that I think is one way that our church can intentionally practice this out in the way in the time before us. That challenge comes through the United Methodist Women. A few months ago, the UMW invited in a woman named Mary Akins to come and speak to them, about mental illness and mental illness. She's the director of the National Association of Mental Illness in Hays, Kansas. She also happens to be the district superintendent's wife, but for our purposes, she's the director of NAMI in Hays, Kansas. And she came and she invited us to a challenge to say, how can the church become an inviting place for those with mental illness? When we think of mental illness, we think of the most severe cases of mental illness, but this expands it all. Yes, it is talking about those really severe cases, but it's also talking about the person who's barely on the autism spectrum back here. How does the church focus on all of this and help to educate, help to respond, help to be welcoming, help to kind of work against that stigma that goes on in mental illness? And I think that this church has an opportunity to be a church that will be able to answer that call. And I think that because when we think of mental illnesses, we as this church do not think of just random, obscure theys. We think of faces. We know these people. This church has been rocked by this. This church has been affected by this. And I think that puts us in a unique position to be able to reach out to those in the community around us. NAMI says that at any given time, I think it was something like 13% of any group is dealing with a mental illness at any given time, and upwards of 50% will deal with a mental illness at some point in their lives. I think this is an opportunity for us. If you will answer the call, I'll get in touch. We'll try and get this going. But I am urging you to consider that and to answer that call as a church. Will you go with me to become radically hospitable no matter what we do, but perhaps even in that manner? May the words of my mouth and meditation of all our hearts be acceptable to God. Amen.